If you want to contact us, contact me, please feel free. I am available 24/7 usually. If there's anything that will come up from today that I really want to point out over here is these 2 points. Again, because it's not a I didn't want to start with a technical aspect, which is kind of weird for me. I really want to focus on, again, a concept that I have to deal with in the past 2 years with an individual across the data community practice, which is how do you take all those individual knowledge bites that you have. Any one of us over here is really knowledgeable in something very specific, and we know some other stuff, and we all know how to Google, which is, again, I don't know what we'll do with that Stack Overflow, but that's a whole other story. But regardless of that, you know something, the person next to you knows something else, but that is very nice, that's very great. But then comes the problem when you actually have to apply this, when you actually have to take this information and apply this to an actual problem in the real world. And that's essentially what I'm going to touch on, which is how do you take all those knowledge bites and how do you think about this to actually delivering a solution to a real problem that is end-to-end. So 2 points that I really want to make over here. So the first one is when you're thinking about your problem, again, and the problem I'm not defining as I want to create a graph, but rather I want to create a decision tool for a decision maker, or I want to make a decision about where to go in the next vacation, whatever the range might be. So the first thing is your objective function. You really need to consider all the parts, and we'll touch on this in a second, really need to touch about all the objectives that when you're trying to end up as a value. So that's the first thing. The second piece is think about all those little bites of information that you know about how to do NLP and how do you do, for example, word embedding, which is very, very cool in practice, and we'll see an example in a second. But how do you take that and actually apply what you take out of the word embedding in order to deliver a solution? So these are the 2 elements that I really want to touch on. I really want to start with a demo. So like I said, we're not going to show this live over here, but okay. Can I have the next slide, please? All right, and the next slide. So what I really want to go over here is, let's say you have an application over here, and this is just a representation. This is a shiny dashboard, and you really want to take an end-to-end solution. So what that looks like. Can I have the next slide, please? So essentially what this tool does, later on, if you want to go in the back in the table, I can show you this live, is to take a call, customer service call, and really make a decision about the probability of whatever you want to apply to that particular call. Think call center, think any end-to-end end-to-end of an audio file. So you have essentially multiple components over here. The end result is how do I make a decision? And in order to do this, you're really breaking it down backwards to your elements over here. So what you have over here is essentially the ability to upload a file, an audio file. How do you process audio file? By the way, last week, audio processing book with R came out, an excellent book, really highly recommending that. But you have an API call. So we have an API call to Google over here. We have transcription, we have deep neural network, and we have the audio representation. And as you can see at the bottom left, we have a probability, we have topic, all of this really putting together. So this is essentially a representation of an element that this kind of a solution, this kind of thinking will deliver. So you know how to do an API call, for example, but how do you connect that to an actual decision? Now I have a text. I can take the text, I can work with an audio. Next slide, please. And you have the sentiment over here, and I'm not going to dive into this so much, but you can see that now you can make a decision about a particular call. So this taking into account, let's move to the next slide and really going to talk about how this has worked. So in practice, your model, and I'm sure we all know elements of this one, is really just any machine learning, any code base is really a small element in your entire architecture of your solution. It's not really going to be the main thing per se. I read someplace it's roughly about 5% of actual solution is actually your machine learning code. It's really how do you consider the different elements of the operation? How do you consider the different elements of the graphical representation? The user interface you need to take into account. So you have machine learning. How do you take the machine learning and connect that to your user interface so the user can actually do something about that? So that's where your objective function comes into play. And this is really the main point over here. And I really want you to think about when you approach a solution, your machine learning piece or your code base over here is really, it's a portion of it. And you need to address with a capability, preferably in R, that will address the different elements over here. So you have to consider the input. You have to think about what data you have available. How do you generate data? How do you access that? How a user will access that information? And that is through variety of packages, variety of capabilities that you might have in your tool. You have to think about the cost elements of this one. So I'm talking about computational power. I'm talking about architecture, how much that's going to cost you, cost the user, and is it worth it? So think about the return on your investment over here. And like I said, the cost also comes as a human cost, like how much time and effort this will take. Your process really takes into account how much interaction you need. So in the demo, just in the slide that I just showed, your interaction is just one button. Again, in the back, you will actually be able to see this live. You just upload the audio file. You upload the audio file. We will do, this tool itself does the audio processing. It does the API call. It does the NLP capability over there to make decision. The machine learning run on top of that. All of that is happening in the back end. The user doesn't care. So that's important to us, for you to know when you're developing this tool. And then, again, it's really about what the business problem is. And that's really where I spend a lot of my time, and a lot of the teams that we're running really need to take the problem and convert it to a business problem, which is, what is really the objective that you're trying to do? Are you trying to make a decision? Are you trying to impact the operation? And every piece over here will impact what you're actually going to do with this particular tool. I want to end to point over here, the value. Really, where is the value of your tool? So if you have a nice graph, you have a nice analysis, you did your statistics, that is important. That is important to the decision, but it's a one thing. Is it solving the problem on a continuous basis? Is it an end-to-end solution? Or the next month, when you have to do it again, or somebody else has to do it again, then how do you actually approach that? How do you actually implement that? So I want you, so each element over here in this objective function really need to into account, every element needs to take the capability by itself. And that is essentially where you apply your different knowledge and work as a team. So let's move on to the next slide real second. And this is how we actually think about this. I'm really starting with the problem, really looking at the business question, and really how do you decompose the business question. And it's not only a data science exercise, it's really around the different elements that goes into the solution. Do they really care about seeing the data? If they don't care, then you don't show it. But if they do, you do. Where's the data coming from? Do I need to apply any sort of web scraping, or the data is labeled and nicely organized? So that's something. And the main point in this slide is the point in the middle over here. You solve a problem not all at once. You can assume, and this is something that I talk a lot to different leaders within our organization, which is, I can make the assumption, because of all of you over here and because of other developers out there, I can make an assumption that when I look at it as a kind of a Lego pieces, so I have a problem on the right end and I want to get to a solution, I can assume that, okay, I need to do X, I need to do Y, I need to do Z, and each one of those, somebody has a deep knowledge of that one and solve that, or to a degree, and then I can apply that capability. And then comes the problem, how do I actually connect those those capabilities, but I would assume that those capabilities exist. So that is, and then we do a step approach over here. So if we go to the next slide, and is really where I want to take this and really show this to a practical example. And really, how do we take this approach of really solving one problem at a time and assuming that the capability exists and assuming that those capabilities can interact with each other and really talk to pass information from a capability to a capability. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to go through the architecture over here, and you can see that each element over here, I'm using different capabilities, different packages, different information that will feed into that. So the problem statement over here is, how do I find information? How do I find a particular piece of text in a really large pile of text? That, and again, there's an NLP discussion later on, I'm not going to go into that, but how do I go and find information in this pile of text that I know that exists out there by my query? So it's essentially an information retrieval problem. So how do we go this is I break it into the component of capability. So the first thing is you take where's the data? So if you remember from the objective function, we took online data, we really scraped that, so there are different packages and different capability to do that. Okay, I have all this information, a lot of PDFs, I need to OCR this information and really connect this information into a one location, do the data cleanup. Again, not NLP discussion, but I know now I have a bunch of clean text. I need to detect elements of the information. So, for example, entity. So there are capability like core NLP or an API call to other services, for example, Google, that will provide that. And so I need to build an API connection to Google. Once I have all of that, I can start building word embedding, and that's and other classification capabilities. And again, for this one, there's word vector is one of the ones that we use, and the idea is, okay, now I have the connection of I know enough about those words. I can then link that to a particular data bank that we need to create, because the user doesn't care, for lack of a better term, where is this data. They're assuming it's just out there, and then from there I need to create a user interface, a connection point. So again, we use Shiny and other capabilities as you link that. And what you get is essentially, we think about in data science like the picture that you see at the bottom, which is I take every token and I have information about this token. So for example, the term what is a request for information. It's related to a will. I know that the term post doesn't mean a post, it means a location, etc. And so we're thinking about this in this kind of term. Okay, nice little table, a part of speech. I know what they related to. I know what the connection is. Post is related to a special agent, etc. But that's really cool. Okay, I solved the problem of tabulating my information, and now I have all of this. But the user doesn't care. Like, this is can I have the next slide, please? The user doesn't care. So what I want to present, again, taking this concept into account, is you taking this query and this information that you receive, and you can OCR it. Okay, you did OCR. Now what? Now the OCR takes into account the fact that there are questions. Can we identify question, etc. And all this needs to happen seamlessly, because you took into account in the objective function that the value to the user is that it's going to be simple, and they don't really care what's happening behind the scenes. So we care about the table from the last slide, but in reality, okay, we have the question, we identify the question, we submit the question. Can I have the next slide, please? And what happens in the back end is that we created the semantic link. So the point that I'm trying to make is that, and again, I wish I could show this live. Go to the back, I'll show later on in the break, this will be live. But the idea over here is that taking that word embedding, for example, and identifying what the relationship of a word to a word is, or taking your WordNet synonyms capability, and taking all of that, this is really cool by itself, but putting it together to say, okay, this is like this. That's what the objective function gave me, and that's what I'm really presenting out to the user. And that is essentially what happens over there. It found that the user see a one piece of information, and they can upvote, downvote. That's really where it's the user decision. So again, as you think through your problem, the data elements over here are very interesting, but it's really matter how you really delivering value at the end. So let's move to the next slide. So what I really want to I want individuals to keep in mind, and really what I found, and this is again a concept that I have to deal with on a daily basis, which is how do you deliver a solution and not just an interesting capability? And the answer is connecting different capabilities together to deliver an end-to-end, and we have those capabilities running through this data science community. So I encourage everybody to consider the value of the different options that you add into your tool, into your capability. And it really should be it should be easy to explain what you're doing. It really should be very easy to deliver that. A user should be able to enter new information into your system, into your tool. If it's not easy and it's just a data science, then it's a data science exercise. And really the main point over here is that you need to, like I said before, develop one thing at a time, not all at once, different pilot sections, one thing at a time, and you can assume that different components exist to make that Lego visual ready for you when you're done. Thank you.